Over the past year, I've chronicled the stories and final meals of about 80 condemned individuals from a vast array of time periods and locales. The contents of these meals has ranged from steak and pie, to an individual olive, and even to a clump of dirt. And of course, some of these meals have been very enjoyable, while others have been pretty abysmal. But today, I'm going to be showing you about 20 more final meal requests, and in the end, I'm going to showcase what I believe to be the greatest final meal request of all time. Also, in the near future, I'm going to be posting a compilation of every single final meal request I've covered thus far, in order from the very worst to the very best. So, stay tuned if you're interested in seeing that. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy my fifth and final installation of my Death Row meal rankings. And one last time, thank you so much for allowing me the privilege and honor to share these stories with you. I hope you enjoy. I'm ranking every Death Row final meal request to find out which one's the greatest of all time. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Cleve Foster. On February 13th, 2002, Foster and his friend Sheldon Ward were hanging out at a local bar when they met 30-year-old Mary Powell. Over the course of the night, the majority of the group's conversation took place between Ward and Powell until the bar eventually closed around 2 a.m. Then after just a few more minutes of conversation in the parking lot, Powell left in her car and the men followed closely behind her. However, just 8 hours later, Powell's nude and violated corpse was discovered in a ditch with a gunshot wound to the head. In the end, though Ward claimed that he was the sole one responsible for these acts, both men were found guilty by DNA testing and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For Foster's final meal, he requested 2 fried chickens, french fries, and a 5-gallon bucket of peaches. In my opinion, I'm a big fan of the salty sweet vibe, but I do wish there were a few more flavors in the mix. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Dennis Bagwell. On September 20th, 1995, Bagwell and his girlfriend drove to his mother's house and asked to borrow some money. However, to his curiosity, she only offered him $20. So he angrily went back to his car to tell his girlfriend what had happened and then stormed back into the house. Once inside, he proceeded to break his mother's neck and strangle her to death, shoot his half-sister in the head, crush the skull of her daughter, then strangled and violated his 14-year-old relative. And though he tried to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, he was ultimately captured and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Bagwell requested a steak, fried chicken, barbecue ribs, french fries and onion rings, a pound of bacon, a dozen scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, sliced tomatoes, salad, 2 hamburgers, peach cobbler, coffee, milk, and iced tea. In my opinion, this spread had a great variety of dishes and each one was incredibly comforting. I'm placing this meal in S tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the night caller Eric Edgar Cooke. Between the years of 1958 and 63, Cooke carried out a series of what seemed to be unrelated hit and runs throughout Perth, Western Australia. In each different case, Cooke used a wide variety of weapons including knives, scissors, guns, an axe, a car, and even his bare hands. Sometimes, he would kill his victims when they caught him robbing their home. In others, he simply shot them dead when they answered their door. So due to this inconsistency across the 8 total murders, this led to a police investigation whereby more than 30,000 people were fingerprinted and 60,000 rifles were tested. In the end, this investigation was ultimately successful and Cooke was captured and sentenced to death by hanging. For his final meal, Cooke requested steak, eggs, chips, and peaches and cream. In my opinion, this meal was fairly simple, but each element definitely pulled its weight. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Jimmy L. Glass. On Christmas Eve of 1982, Glass and his friend Jimmy Wingo were serving out prison sentences at the Webster Parish Jail when they decided they wanted to make their escape. So, when they were left unattended while making calls to their families, the two took advantage, went down the elevator, and exited the compound. However, less than 24 hours after escaping, the pair broke into a nearby residence. Here, the two men threw a cinder block through a window, stormed inside, and executed Erlene and Newton Brown in their bed. As a result of these crimes, both men were captured and sentenced to death by electrocution. For his final meal, Glass requested a pepperoni pizza, a chef's salad with blue cheese dressing, fresh peaches and cream, and 2 soft drinks. In my opinion, this meal is pretty well-rounded, but there's nothing about it that's particularly special. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of John Joubert. On August 22nd, 1982, 11-year-old Ricky Stetson went on a jog but strangely disappeared. However, the next morning, his corpse was found in a ditch, undressed, stabbed, strangled, and bitten. Unfortunately, this case quickly went cold due to a lack of evidence. But then, around 1,500 miles away, another 13-year-old boy was discovered deceased under similar circumstances about a year later, and a 12-year-old boy was found with his throat slit so severely he was almost decapitated. In the end, physical evidence and FBI profiling led to Joubert's capture, and he was ultimately sentenced to death by electrocution. For his final meal, Joubert requested a cheese pizza with green peppers and onions, strawberry cheesecake, and Coca-Cola. In my opinion, this meal is pretty solid across the board, but there's nothing about it that really stands out. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Mary Blandy. In the year 1746, Blandy was a well-mannered and educated 26-year-old woman who came from a respected middle-class English family. At the time, she met and fell in love with the son of a Scottish nobleman named Captain William Henry Cranston and decided she wanted to marry him. However, because it was revealed that Cranston was already married and had a child in Scotland, Blandy's father disapproved of their marriage. So, Mary decided to give her father what she claimed to think was a love potion that would make him approve of the marriage. However, in reality, this potion was just arsenic, and her father died as a result. In the end, after a 13-hour trial, Blandy was sentenced to death by hanging. For her final meal, Blandy requested mutton chops and apple pie. In my opinion, if I ranked these meals respective of time period, this would be S tier, but I don't. So, I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the Phantom Hobo killer, Lloyd Gomez. Growing up, Gomez lacked a formal education and regularly found himself in and out of jail. However, this didn't deter him from continuing his life of crime, and between the years of 1950 and 51, Gomez set out on a killing spree. Primarily targeting vagrants living in hobo jungles along railroad tracks, Gomez would typically murder his victims through crushing their heads with large rocks or other blunt objects. In the end, Gomez was captured for an unrelated burglary, but during questioning, spontaneously confessed to killing 9 total victims. As a result of these crimes, Gomez was sentenced to death by asphyxiation gas. For his final meal, Gomez requested fried chicken, fried potatoes, peas, a tomato and lettuce salad, toast, apple pie, and coffee. In my opinion, this meal was super well-rounded, but it doesn't quite stand out as elite. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Jeffrey David Matthews. On the morning of January 27, 1994, Minnie Short was awakened after hearing a noise in her home, and when she went to investigate the source, she found standing in her living room 20-year-old Tracy Dyer, who sprang upon her and slit her throat. Then, when her husband followed in next, his great-nephew Jeffrey David Matthews, who was also the second intruder, shot him in the head and proceeded to rob the house. However, after the two men escaped the scene, Short got up despite her neck wounds and walked down the street to get help. In the end, Short survived the attack, both men were captured, and Matthews was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Matthews requested a deep dish meat lover's pizza, deep fried jumbo shrimp, and hush puppies. In my opinion, I'm not sure if this spread had the best synergy, but each of the items involved were individually solid. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of the Butcher of Baghdad, Saddam Hussein. In the year 1979, 42-year-old Saddam Hussein rose to power and became the dictatorial president of Iraq. Over the course of his 24-year presidency, Hussein became infamous for being particularly brutal towards his opposition. Between ordering massacres on Iraqi Shiites and Kurds, crushing political dissent, and using chemical weapons on his own people, Hussein ruled until 2003 when he was finally captured by the American Task Force 121. For his crimes against humanity, Hussein was tried in Iraqi courts and sentenced to death by hanging. For his final meal, Hussein requested a traditional Iraqi spread of chicken and rice and hot water with honey. In my opinion, this meal was undoubtedly delicious, but it feels a little bit more akin to a weeknight dinner than a final meal ever. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of Thomas Martin Thompson. On September 11th, 1981, Thompson, his roommate, and Ginger Fleischle were on a night out in Laguna Beach, California. Over the course of the evening, the group went bar hopping and smoked marijuana until eventually calling it a night. But then, Thompson brought Fleischle back to his apartment where he proceeded to sexually violate her, stab her 5 times in the head, then bury her body in a nearby field. When Fleischle's body was discovered just 3 days later, forensic evidence led to Thompson's capture. And though the case was mired in controversy, Thompson Thompson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Thompson requested Alaskan king crab, spinach salad, pork fried rice, Mandarin-style spare ribs, a hot fudge sundae, and a 6-pack of Coca-Cola. In my opinion, this spread not only has a nice selection of dishes, but also solid variety and quantity. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Caroll Cole. During Cole's childhood, his father went to fight in World War II, so he remained home with his mother and was forced to watch as she regularly brought home men. To keep this a secret, Cole's mother often beat him into silence, which sowed the seeds of hatred towards women that would last him for the rest of his life. Eventually, this would lead to Cole killing any woman he deemed as promiscuous. So, over the course of 9 years, Cole would meet women at the bar for intercourse, and while he'd let most of them go, he'd kill those that he claimed were loose. In the end, Cole claimed the lives of at least 14 women before finally being captured and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Cole requested jumbo fried shrimp, french fries, a salad, and Boston clam chowder. In my opinion, I think this spread was certainly delicious, but there's nothing about it that was particularly special. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Ernesto Che Guevara. During his time as a young medical student, Guevara traveled throughout South America and was deeply disturbed by the widespread poverty and hunger that ravaged these communities. So, to fight back against the capitalist exploitation by the US, which he believed was the root of these issues, he helped to facilitate the Cuban Revolution and stand up a new regime. Then, following this uprising, Guevara left Cuba to support more revolutionary efforts across Africa and South America, but was ultimately captured by CIA-assisted Bolivian forces. In the end, the Bolivian President René Barrientos ordered that he be summarily executed by a pair of Bolivian soldiers. For his final meal, Guevara was given a bowl of sopa de maní by a local 19-year-old school teacher. In my opinion, this soup was far better than I expected, but at the end of the day, it was still just soup. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Véronique Frantz. In the year 1852, France was hired to work as a servant for 43-year-old George Guntz, a wealthy winemaker who lived with his wife, son, and parents. Despite her role as a housemaid, France was treated like family thanks to all her diligence and hard work. However, when Guntz's wife fell ill a few months after she started, he told France that he'd consider her as a potential partner should his wife pass away. So, over the course of the following months, she secretly poisoned Guntz's mother-in-law and wife. But when Guntz decided to remarry with a woman from another town instead of her, France would poison him as well. In the end, local townsfolk became suspicious of France, and she was tried and sentenced to death by decapitation. For her final meal, France requested a café au lait and a bread roll. In my opinion, I'm a fan of both of these items, but as a final meal ever, it leaves a lot to be desired. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the glamour girl slayer, Harvey Glatman. In the year 1957, 30-year-old Glatman moved to Los Angeles, California, where he began to pose as a professional photographer. In doing so, he would lure in aspiring models to his apartment by offering them promises of work. However, once they'd arrive, Glatman would proceed to tie each woman up, take photos of her once she's been bound, and then sexually violate her. And to ensure they wouldn't tell, he'd strangle them to death, then dump their bodies in the desert. In the end, while in the process of trying to kidnap his fourth victim, Glatman was arrested by the police and ultimately sentenced to death by asphyxiation gas. For his final meal, Glatman requested a shrimp cocktail, a rare T-bone steak, french fries, soda, and a banana split. In my opinion, I'm not the biggest fan of rare steak, but aside from that, this was a solid and balanced spread. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Michael Anthony Rodriguez. In the year 2000, 7 inmates were being held in a maximum security prison when they decided they wanted to make their escape. So, on the morning of December 13th, the group proceeded to subdue 16 prison staff and inmates, steal weapons from the guard tower, and flee from the compound in a stolen truck. Once they were free, the group then embarked on a series of crimes. Here, they robbed numerous stores, stole multiple cars, and even killed a police officer. In the end, the group was recaptured and all surviving members were sentenced to death by lethal injection. The first of the group to be executed was Michael Anthony Rodriguez, and his final meal was a spicy chicken breast, a grilled pork steak, a bacon cheeseburger, a garden salad, and french fries. In my opinion, this spread had plenty of good variety, but I wish it also included something sweet. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the first person legally executed in Vermont, Emeline Meaker. In the spring of 1879, Meaker's 8-year-old niece Alice was living in an overcrowded orphanage. So, to get her out of this situation, a childcare worker approached Meaker and her husband and asked if they'd be willing to take her into their home. And in exchange for a stipend of $400, the couple agreed to do so. However, when Alice arrived, Emeline quickly became displeased with this arrangement and decided she wanted to kill her. So on April 23rd of 1880, Emeline and her son put a sack over Alice's head, brought her out into the forest, and forced her to drink a cocktail of poison. In the end, Meaker's son testified against her, and she was ultimately sentenced to death by hanging. For her final meal, Meaker requested boiled eggs, toast, a potato, a donut, and a cup of coffee. In my opinion, the meal was a bit plain, but for the dishes included, they were all pretty solid. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of King Charles I of England. During the early 1600s, England was embroiled in an internal power struggle between the kingdom's parliament and the reigning King Charles I. Throughout his rule, Charles strongly believed in the divine right of kings, which often led him to subverting parliamentary approval on mandates and imposing religious conformity across the kingdom. However, in 1642, these tensions would eventually escalate to what is now known as the English Civil War. Here, the royalist supporters of the king were pitted against the parliamentarians who opposed his overreach, and in the end, the parliamentarians emerged victorious. King Charles was found guilty for treason, and he was ultimately sentenced to death by decapitation with an axe. For his final meal, Charles consumed the simple staples of bread and wine. In my opinion, there's nothing bad about this spread, but it doesn't stack up to the others on this list. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Charles Rhines. In February of 1992, Rhines was fired from his job as a night baker at a local donut shop for failing to follow orders. However, just a few weeks after his dismissal, he ran out of money and decided he wanted to go and burglarize the shop. So, using a copy of the backdoor key, Rhines broke in. But then, when 22-year-old Donovan Schaefer, who was a current employee, came to pick up some supplies, Rhines immediately ambushed him and stabbed him in the stomach. And though Schaefer promised to be silent about the crimes if Rhines would bring him to a hospital, Rhines instead forced him into a storeroom and stabbed him to death. As a result of these crimes, Rhines was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Rhines requested fried chicken, cantaloupe, lefse, yogurt, black licorice, ice cream, root beer, and coffee. In my opinion, this was a pretty eclectic spread, and it hit on a ton of the notes I was looking for. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Clarence Ray Allen. In the year 1974, Clarence began his criminal career when he and his son robbed a local market run by Ray and Fran Schledowitz. However, Allen's son eventually told his girlfriend Mary Sue Kitts about the robbery, and she would go on to tell the couple the Allens were responsible. So, to get his revenge, Clarence ordered a hit on Kitts, and she was strangled and thrown into a canal. Then, when he was in prison serving a life sentence for this crime, Clarence ordered an attack that would result in a total of 3 more deaths. In the end, these 3 murders were carried out successfully, and Allen was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Allen requested a buffalo steak, fry bread, Kentucky fried chicken, sugar-free pecan pie, sugar-free black walnut ice cream, and whole milk. In my opinion, all these dishes were spectacular, and my only complaint is that I wish there were some more sides. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Adolf Eichmann. During the Second World War, Eichmann played a critical role in carrying out the so-called Final Solution, or the Nazi plan to exterminate the Jewish people. Specifically, as this plan was being carried out, Eichmann was directly responsible for the identification, assembly, and transportation of Jews to concentration and extermination camps. And while over the course of the war, Eichmann's direct actions led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Jews, after the Nazis were defeated, he managed to flee from Europe and went into hiding in Buenos Aires, Argentina. However, in May of 1960, he was tracked down and captured by Mossad, brought back to Israel to stand trial, and ultimately sentenced to death by hanging. For his final meal, Eichmann requested a bottle of wine along with the usual prison food of cheese, bread, olives, and tea. In my opinion, though this spread is solid, there's nothing about it that's particularly special. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Gary Carl Simmons. On August 11th, 1996, Jeffrey Wolf and his girlfriend Charlene Leeser drove from Texas to Mississippi to collect a drug debt owed by Simmons and his former brother-in-law Timothy Milano. However, upon arriving at Simmons' house, an argument between the two parties ensued, and Milano proceeded to shoot and kill Wolf, and Simmons imprisoned Leeser and sexually violated her. But she eventually escaped and reported them to the police. In the end, Simmons was captured and ultimately ultimately sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Simmons requested 2 custom Pizza Hut pizzas, 80 ounces of Parmesan cheese, 80 ounces of ranch dressing, Doritos, nacho cheese, jalapenos, shakes, ice cream, 2 20-ounce cherry Cokes, and a supersized order of McDonald's fries. In my opinion, there was a ton of quantity and decent variety, but some of the items chosen were kinda mid. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of Robert Charles Comer. On February 3rd, 1987, Comer and his girlfriend Geneva Willis were camping at Apache Lake when they decided to invite a nearby camper to join them for some dinner. However, around 9 p.m., Comer shot this man in the head, stole his medical technician badge, and then hid his body. Later that night, the couple then continued on to the campsite of Jane Jones and Richard Smith, where they posed as drug enforcement agents with the stolen badge from before. Here, they tied the other couple up, robbed their campsite as well, and then kidnapped them. However, when their truck broke down as the group was fleeing the scene, Jones managed to make an escape, which ultimately led to Comer and Willis's capture. As a result of these crimes, Comer was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Comer requested fried okra, 4 buns with lots of butter, lots of salt, and 2 slices of banana bread. In my opinion, this meal does a great job at crushing the fat, sugar, and carb cravings, but it struggles to compete with some of the others on the list. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we're finally taking a look at the selection of Josh Slavin. On August 31st, 2023, Slavin posted his first death row meal. However, unbeknownst to him, he'd go on to continue posting these for the next year and a half. But eventually, thanks to the support of his intelligent and kind and demure viewers, he decided to take the leap and quit his full-time corporate job. But unfortunately, due to the third law of influencer dynamics, as soon as he quit, he immediately dropped a course, pump and dumped a crypto project, and posted an apology video where he pretended to cry. In the end, Slavin was ultimately captured and sentenced to die by the Brazen Bull. For his final meal, Josh requested pizza, fruit, ramen, a flight of breads, assorted sauces and palate cleansers, various sausages and mustards, a gyro and fried plantains, these items, banana bread French toast, tres leches cake and mango sticky rice, cherry cobbler, and an assortment of beverages. In my opinion, this meal is the perfect symphony of flavors and textures and leaves absolutely nothing to be desired. I'm placing this meal in S tier. And from the bottom of my heart, you guys' support has changed my life, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. Thank you guys so much.